Chris Voss is a former lead FBI negotiator, a dynamic speaker, and author of the book Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as If Your Life Depended on It. Chris worked in the FBI Crisis Negotiation Unit for 24 years and was the FBI's chief international hostage and kidnapping negotiator from 2003 to 2007. After working on more than 150 international hostage cases, Chris retired from the FBI in 2007 and founded the Black Swan Group, an organization that trains both businesses and individuals on negotiation skills. Chris has lectured on negotiation at business schools across the country. He is an adjunct professor at Harvard Law School and Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business, and is a lecturer at the Marshall School of Business at USC. Chris has been seen on ABC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, and he has been featured in Forbes, the New York Times, Variety, and Time Magazine. Welcome, Chris, and thanks for joining us on Life Excellence.
Yeah, Brian, happy to be here. Thanks. Thank you.
Chris, I'm truly honored to have you on the show, and we haven't had anyone from law enforcement, let alone a high-level international crisis negotiator. Tell us about your background and how you ended up joining the FBI and becoming a hostage and kidnapping negotiator.
Yeah, well, originally I wanted to be in law enforcement. My original vision was to be a street cop. When I was about 16 years old, I saw a movie based on a true story of two cops in New York. It was called The Super Cops, and I was inspired by it. They were very creative, very innovative, mavericks, and the community loved them, and they put a lot of bad guys in jail. So I thought, why not have a job where you did a lot of good and you helped a lot of people? And then when I got into law enforcement at the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, my father had higher aspirations for me, so he encouraged me to look at federal law enforcement. I talked to a Secret Service agent who traveled all over the world with the Secret Service, and I grew up in Iowa. I'd never been anywhere. I think I'd seen Canada from a distance. Crossing a river into Illinois was a big deal for me. So traveling all over the world sounded cool. Secret Service wasn't hiring, but the FBI was at the time. I didn't know the difference. The federal alphabet, FBI, CIA, DEA, I didn't know any of that. Joined the FBI, ended up in New York City. Terrorist Task Force. Actually was on a SWAT team with the FBI when I was at Pittsburgh and re-injured my knee. And we had hostage negotiators. What do they do? That doesn't look hard. How hard could it be? Talking to people. And so I shifted to hostage negotiation, and it was great. And it was much more to it than met the eye. And one thing led to another, and I'm sitting here in Las Vegas talking to you on on your podcast.
You mentioned a couple things, Chris. You mentioned SWAT, law enforcement, obviously, and television. And when I think about a hostage situation, and I think a lot of our listeners and viewers are probably picturing this too, it's how it's depicted on either television or in the movies. And of course, the stereotype is that the cops or the SWAT or FBI go in and they buy time until the snipers are in position. And then the sniper takes out the bad guy and saves all the hostages in the bank. Now, after reading your book, Never Split the Difference, it's clear that that isn't the actual strategy going into the negotiation. And of course, it's usually not or almost never the way it plays out. I'm curious, so is there a playbook for entering a hostage or kidnapping situation, negotiations, or how does that work going into it?
Well, a hostage negotiator is the ultimate cold calling salesman. What's a cold calling salesman? He's calling you on the phone. You don't particularly want to talk to him, and you probably don't want what he's selling. And I got to call into a bank, and they're not looking forward to talking to me, and they don't want what I'm selling. We can't force them into it, though. That's like, do you use lawyers to make all your deals? Well, no, that wouldn't really work. On TV, if the negotiators talk to them till they shoot them. If that happened in real life, as soon as we showed up, they'd start throwing bodies out the front door. The reality of it is you show up and you use your tone of voice to calm people down, and you find out what's bugging them, as strange as that sounds. And if you can talk them through it, there's a really good chance they'll change their behavior and see that maybe what they're doing at the moment was not the smartest move.
Yeah.
The funniest thing about the difference between hostage negotiation and business negotiations, hostage negotiations tend to be calmer. Now give that some thought.
Interesting.
How could a conversation with a terrorist or bank robber be calmer? We didn't know it at the time, but just the fact of using a calming, soothing voice actually has a neuroscience impact on the other person, calms them down, makes it easier for them to listen to reason.
How long is a typical hostage negotiation? I mean, I imagine that would go on for hours and maybe sometimes days. How does that work?
Yeah, each one has a profile. You start learning when you start learning the business. There's spontaneous, unplanned, has a tendency to run from anywhere from 2 to 6 hours. Bad guy taking hostages for leverage in a place that's not his or her house. If they're by themselves, going to run about 12, no more than 24 hours. We call that a planned hostage taking, but at a known location.
And so what happens? They just get tired, and so it never goes on for longer than 24 hours because then they'd have to go to sleep. Or
that's exactly it, and that's why the vast majority of them last less than 12 hours. Like if a bad guy had taken a hostage by himself in an office building, commercial site, any place away from home, you don't have the ability, the mental energy to keep it up for much past 12 hours. You're not in your house, so you don't know where to get something to eat. You can't take a nap. You don't know where to go to the bathroom. Actually, a lot of real practical considerations. Now, bad guy trapped in his house on a confrontation that he's been planning for a while, and yes, I am using a male personal pronoun. All hostage takers, almost exclusively men. In a defensive location, prepared for, guy doesn't know when it's going to happen, but figures it's going to happen sometime. It's going to be a little bit more extended duration, even maybe the long siege that could last, depending upon whether or not he's by himself. It could last weeks if he's not by himself. So there are a lot of interesting but really understandable physical dynamics surrounding the event that can let you predict pretty much how long it's going to last.
Chris, I mentioned in your intro that you worked on more than 150 hostage cases. Yeah. That's a lot of cases, but I imagine there are some that you remember more vividly than others. Tell us about a case that stands out for you, one that either profoundly impacted you or maybe caused you to think differently about the world because of the circumstances.
Well, a lot of them, a whole variety of them impacted me profoundly. One of the first ones, the one that was a real turning point, happened in my career very early on. Chase Manhattan Bank, robbery with hostages. And, you mentioned TV before, hostage situations in banks on TV and in movies happens all the time. In point of fact, in reality, it's extremely rare. The one I worked in New York City, which is one of the busier places, as one might imagine, a bank robbery with hostages hadn't happened there in over 20 years. Bad guys know the good guys are on the way. They tend not to want to get caught inside the bank. And we expected the people in the bank to be in crisis. The lead bank robber, the guy who orchestrated the entire event, he actually was extremely calm, exhibited many of the characteristics of a great business negotiator. What would those be, you might ask yourself? Well, a good business negotiator, especially like the CEO of a company, is going to say, I got a board I got to answer to. I got people I got to answer to. Anytime you are talking to someone who's intentionally diminishing their importance in the negotiation, they are the most influential person on their side. They want to talk to you directly because they want to know firsthand what's going on, but they don't want to be backed into a corner to make a decision. This first bank robber at the Chase Bank, he kept saying, there's 7 guys with me. And these guys are dangerous. They're from all over the world. And I'm scared of them. I don't know what they're going to do to me. we initially took all that at face value. I come to learn afterwards that this is a great tactic of business negotiators blaming a guy that's not in the room. There weren't 7 people in the Chase Bank. He was not afraid of all of them. He was not in fear of his life from them in any way, shape, or form. But he knew if he kept acting like he was scared of those guys in a bank with him, we'd have trouble pinning him down, which in fact was the case. And when we finally realized that, we changed our strategy and tactics that ultimately led to the peaceful surrender of everybody on the inside.
And so what happened that caused you to know that the story that he was telling you wasn't the actual reality?
Well, we didn't know for sure right away. I was the second negotiator on the phone. I was coaching the first negotiator. The NYPD commander was running the negotiation operations center, a guy named Hugh McGowan, brilliantly talented guy. And he'd sat and he'd listened to this for about 5 hours. And finally he looked at me and he said, we're going to switch. We're going to put you on the phone. He gave me several pieces of guidance that were very counterintuitive, outside of the normal strategies. But he'd listened to it long enough that his gut instinct was telling him there was something different here. By that point in time also, the first guy who wouldn't give us his name, we'd identified him. And he said, I want you to brace him with his name. First chance you get. The other thing I want you to do is you make sure you end every call. Because this guy kept saying to us, I got to go right now. These guys are coming. And he'd hang up. Or he'd say, look, these guys are standing right here. I'm going to put you on speaker. And he wouldn't talk to us anymore. And Hugh said, you start controlling the end of these calls. We're going to get the upper hand back here. So in an assertive but not aggressive manner, not argumentative, I implemented what he told me to do. Lo and behold, the bank robber, not to be outfoxed, puts his buddy on the phone. We switched, so he switched. Now, his buddy didn't want to be in the bank. And his buddy was looking for a way out. And when he put his buddy on the phone, my late night FM DJ voice, calming, soothing voice, we figured out collectively within about an hour that this guy really wanted to get out of there and he was worried about getting out of there alive. And about an hour and a half into the negotiation, he was surrendering to me outside the bank.
It's interesting. You've talked about calm and being calm and how calm hostage negotiation is compared to business negotiation. And as you're explaining this situation in the bank, my palms are sweating, and it's really anything but calm, even just listening to it. I can't imagine the anxiety and the adrenaline rush I would think that occurs in the midst of an intense negotiation. Maybe it's just from the standpoint of the bad guys, the people you're negotiating with. But although it should be less intense, I'm thinking about people negotiating in everyday life, and it's the same way. It isn't, Chris. People don't typically attribute negotiation to a calm experience or the late night DJ voice. They don't want to get into it at all. I mean, it's kind of like public speaking, right? It's one of those big fears, whether it's negotiating for a high salary in their job or especially dickering with somebody, like negotiating, say, the price of a car. It seems like a lot of people would rather have a root canal than enter into those kinds of negotiations. Now, I understand the importance of negotiating in a hostage situation. Obviously, somebody's life is on the line, oftentimes, and so that's extremely important. But why is it important for everyone to get over their aversion of negotiating so that we can become more effective negotiators?
Well, to get into really performance success thinking, you got to be collaborative. Now, what am I talking about? Most people start their career, start to achieve some success by being competitive or even cutthroat in negotiation. And as soon as you get competitive, if you didn't have any structure to what you were doing, if you didn't have a methodology, if you didn't learn anything, you probably weren't doing very well. And you get competitive, you get cutthroat, you start thinking win-lose. You score a couple of pretty good negotiations. And it's addictive. You like that. It's like pulling a slot machine arm and having the thing hit the jackpot and have the slots ring and go off and give you, quarters, dimes, whatever you're playing. It's an exciting experience. And the excitement of those occasional wins causes people to lose track of the fact that the casinos, and I live in Las Vegas, but I've always thought of Las Vegas and gambling as a great metaphor for life. The casinos let you win. They got to let you win 1 in every 84 pulls to keep you going, because the thrill of success is so big, you forget that you lost 83 times. So competitive negotiation goes from maybe a 0 win rate to maybe a 10% win rate. And you think that's great and it's exciting. The problem is getting to collaborative negotiations is counter to that in spirit and ultimately far more profitable. You start making deals with people. You start making deals that both sides love, therefore both sides want to deal with each other again. You get a velocity of deals. And so then not only is the deal probably better for you because you discovered something special you didn't know, but the other side wants to be a repeat negotiation customer. They want to do it with you again, and that's how you build relationships with people you can trust over the long run.
So what's a successful negotiation then? One where both parties, let's say, just an example, there are 2 parties, one where both parties walk away feeling like they're the ones who have won, or?
Well, how they feel walking away is very important. Now, they don't necessarily feel like they've won. They need to feel like, number one, they got hurt. Everybody is much happier with whatever the outcome is if they feel they were heard and they were involved in a process. A lot of people will actually take your deal exactly as proposed, as long as they get to have their say first and they're sure that you heard them. So they need to feel like they got heard out. And then they need to feel like they were treated fairly. And then the real bonus is, did you discover something in the deal that you didn't know would be there in the first place, which might have made the deal better for you? One of our clients provides objects, materials, goods, and services to some of the biggest names on earth. Home Depot, some of the big stores that are famous for really negotiating really hard on price. This guy, in supplying them, started to talk to them about things other than price that made his products more valuable to them, and actually got substantial increases in his pricing when he learned how to deliver it in a way that worked for them better and actually worked for him at the same time. So both sides feel better off, and my client is making a lot more money, and the people that he supplies are much happier with him because he delivers it in a way that's really tailored for them.
So what's really going on there? Are they feeling better about the relationship and not thinking as much about price? And I don't mean to suggest that your client is being manipulative in any way, but what is it that causes them to be maybe less concerned about price than they were before your client started discussing things unrelated to price?
Yeah, well, it's really how the deal is implemented for them. Like, he wants his guys to consistently search for better ways to provide the service that's more tailored to them, whether it's delivery, whether it's volume of delivery. It could be any one of a number of ways. It's actually easy for them to implement, and the other side likes a lot. So, what makes this price necessary for you? What makes this timetable necessary for you? What are you up against here? What kind of challenges are you facing? How can we deliver our service in a way that adapts to your challenges so that what we are giving you is even more valuable? Now, I realize that sounds very theoretical, but in point of fact, it's really a great way to not just hold your price, but raise your prices, because the intangibles will end up making a big difference if you can get them to tell you what those intangibles are. And that's what about this this whole approach, this methodology, which we refer to trust-based influence. How do I deal with you in a way that you're going to trust me so that you can tell me the stuff that you won't tell anybody else?
That makes total sense. Chris, as you know, our guests on Life Excellence are people who have achieved success at a high level in their chosen professions. And I think you just talked about one, but what are other characteristics that separate great negotiators from everyone else? Is it simply being equipped with tactics and strategies like the one you just described, or is there more to it than that?
Well, you got to be coachable. You got to like to learn. I've got a class on Masterclass. My negotiation course on Masterclass has consistently been their top selling course, their most viewed course, or in their top most viewed courses. It's done really well for them. Masterclass told me a long time ago that they told me the people that love Masterclass are ambitious. Now, a lot of people overlook the word ambitious, but if you're really ambitious, a characteristic is you like innovative stuff. You like to learn. You're kind of curious about how to get better, and you're willing to put in the work if it's interesting and innovative and it actually makes a difference. Now, you're hardworking, but being hardworking alone isn't enough. It's essential and inadequate. You gotta like interesting and innovative things because you don't want to be like the rest of the crowd. And you realize that best practices are often just common practices, which make you average.
I have to confess, I'm not familiar with your masterclass, but I'll definitely check it out. And I encourage our listeners and viewers to do so as well. But your book, Never Split the Difference, is a great book. And I've read it a couple times. I don't expect you to remember this, but you and I actually met in 2019 in Chicago when you spoke at the Global Leadership Summit. And so I bought your book, and we took a photo together with the book, and I took it home and read it immediately. And then I read it again preparing for this interview, and it's really a terrific book. And Chris, what I like about it is you combine captivating stories of successful negotiations with practical tools and techniques that we can all use in everyday negotiations. And so we love entertainment. And I think that really sets your book apart in the negotiation genre, because a lot of times we'll pick up these books about negotiation, and it's a list of strategies, and certainly can't compare to the international hostage or kidnapping negotiations that you've experienced. So I think that differentiates your book from the others. But aside from that, the tools and tactics are great too. Now, unfortunately, we won't have enough time on the show today to all become expert negotiators. But I'd love to talk about 2 or 3 tactics our listeners and viewers can begin developing today in order to negotiate more effectively. Would that be okay?
I'd love it.
I've written down a couple. The first concept that I wrote down is mirroring. What is mirroring, Chris? And how does it help when we're negotiating?
Yeah, mirroring is not the body language mirroring that everybody's familiar with. The hostage negotiators mirror, the Black Swan method mirror, starts with just repeating the last 1 to 3 words of what somebody just said. And it could be just one word. It's not really more than 5. Once you start to get more than 5, you're really paraphrasing, which is a separate skill. But mirroring is like a concise skill, and you just upward inflect or downward inflect, however you want. Like if you'd have said to me, I'm really interested in being more effective as a negotiator, I might say, more effective as a negotiator? Upward inflection, curious tone of voice. And he'd be like, yeah, what I've been saying about negotiation, and you start to give me information. You start to expand on what you just said. Mirroring is this elegant, simple skill that doesn't actually require a whole lot of brain power, but really gets other people talking. If you can sit in the silence, because every now and then you got to let the mirror sink in. Every now and then, if I'd have said, improve your negotiation skills, and you might go, yeah. And then we both got to sit there in the silence while your thoughts connect and I wait for you to go on. So the mirroring is a great skill to get somebody to reword what they've just said and take a little bit more of a deep dive in what you want them to talk more about.
A little more of a deep dive?
Nice. Very nice. I love it. Exactly right. Yeah, you want somebody to expand on what they were just saying and add to it.
Let's talk about silence, because it's such a, first of all, it's not something that people are comfortable with.
Right.
And you know that whether it's in conversations or negotiation or any context, when people are communicating, it's very uncomfortable for most people to have even a little bit of silence. Why is that so important? And maybe if you could just expand it beyond negotiation to just general communication, what is it that silence does that's helpful in communication?
Well, science most of the time lets people think and be more contemplative and give you a better response. Now, you said that most of us are uncomfortable with it. I'm gonna even put a little bit finer point on it. 2 out of 3 people are uncomfortable with silence for different reasons. Because you asked me also why. Black Swan Group, we test people. We put some people into some of our advanced training. We believe that the world splits up evenly into 3 types, which are basically fight, flight, make friends. Analysts, assertives, and accommodators. Fight is the assertive. Analyst is the thinker. Accommodator is a make friends person. So the accommodators, make friends, relationship-oriented person. If you believe in relationships, you think that relationships are money, if you like having lots of friends, if you've got lifelong friends that you're still in touch with throughout your entire life, pretty good chance that you're an accommodator. You're a relationship-oriented person. You're uncomfortable with silence because silence is how you signal anger. The communication, the interaction is so important to you that the meanest thing that you could do is stop talking, withhold that which you value. So you're uncomfortable with silence because you are afraid you're signaling anger, because it's how you signal anger. And when the other side is silent, then you project and you think they're angry. So you're horrified at silence. Now let's talk about the flight guy. The flight guy is the analyst. They look at conflict as simply a possibility, and they look at conflict as extremely costly and extremely counterproductive. That's why they flee from conflict, because conflict's a waste of time. It doesn't get anybody anywhere. Now, these guys and gals love to think. They love analysis. They like decision trees with all sorts of branches and possibilities on them. You ask an analyst a question, they're going to want to go silent for 36 hours while they think everything through. Now, picture the comedy here. An analyst is talking to an accommodator, and the analyst goes dead silent so he can think. He or she can think. And the accommodator is saying to themselves, oh my God, he's furious, he's angry, I got to start talking again. And the analyst is thinking like, why don't they just shut up so I can think this through? Now, finally, the third type, the assertive, the aggressive. I'm a natural born assertive. I like to talk because it makes me feel in control. And I'm controlling the dynamic and controlling the outcome. So when I'm not talking, I feel out of control. And I'm horrified by that, so I can't shut up because I want to maintain control. So our feelings around silence is really driven by which of those 3 types we are. We got plenty of reason to make the assertion that the world breaks up evenly into thirds. Certain groups will skew a little bit in one direction or another, but the world breaks up evenly into thirds. And so 2 out of 3 people struggle with silence. And if you can overcome that struggle, I'll give you a chance to talk. And you're likely to say something really valuable if I can just shut up long enough to give you the chance to say it.
Is that a challenge for you as an assertive? It's interesting that you say you need to talk because you're such an effective negotiator, obviously. And a lot of negotiation, I think, is allowing the other person to talk, especially if you're in a hostage situation, I would think, getting them to open up and share things.
Yeah. It was a challenge till I learned how effective it was.
Okay.
Like my basic nature is I think of myself as both a mercenary and a missionary. A mercenary is I want to know what works. I'm not going to take a moral judgment on it. I want to know what works. I want to know what's simply a tool. Now, a tool becomes good or evil in the hands of who's ever using it. So I want a tool that works, and then I want to use it in point of fact, a moralistic way. I do have my own core values, the number of things that I believe in: honesty, integrity, treating people well, long-term relationships. Those are my values, and I like to mix that in with tools that work in a way that don't hurt you. So dynamic silence, as soon as I found out that it was an extremely effective method within the extremely effective skill within a skill set, I'm like, oh, all right, I can do that because it works.
And you call it dynamic silence. So that's intentional silence as opposed to
Right.
not doing anything.
To get the dynamic out of it. Yeah, and we've even, originally in the hostage negotiation skills, there were 8 FBI skills. There's now 9 Black Swan method skills. And as a hostage negotiator, they simply called it effective pause. And generally speaking, how long is a pause? 1 to 3 seconds. And then we began to discover what would happen with longer periods of silence and how many great dynamics would come into play if you were willing to go north of 3 seconds. And we think a much more effective label for it, which would make it more attractive to use, is dynamic silence. Go silent, let the dynamics work for you.
That's super effective. And I think we could continue, we could go down a whole rabbit hole on silence and how to use silence after saying a number, for example, in a negotiation. But I don't want to get sidetracked. So I'm going to go back to the tactics. And mirroring was something that I was actually familiar with, Chris. But one tactic that it was brand new to me in reading your book was labeling. How does labeling work and why is it so effective? It seems like a powerful tactic everyone can use.
Oh, geez, it is. It requires a little more practice than mirrors to wrap your mind around. A label is a verbal observation of an emotion or a dynamic. What does that look like? Scripting it out would be: you seem, you sound, you look. You seem angry. You seem upset. It seems like something just crossed your mind. It's either you seem, you sound, you look, or it seems, it sounds, it looks, or even it feels. Feels like you're stonewalling. Feels like you're under a lot of pressure. All those things that I labeled verbally were dynamics or emotions. Now, this is one of the crazier ones, because it appeals to people regardless of their mental energy level or their mental fatigue level. And I'll give you a quick example of 3 types of skills in succession and what they happen. If I were to say to you, Brian, why did you wear that jacket? Your instant response is, what do you mean, why did I wear the jacket? What's the matter with it? I always wear this jacket. Yeah, I love this jacket. This jacket was a gift. The term why, even if you didn't display it overtly, would have instantly triggered defensiveness on your part, which creates friction in our interactions. It's one of the competitive advantages of the Black Swan method, because there's no shortage of instruction out there that says, find out their why. Ask them why. I even saw a Harvard negotiation post recently said, ask them why they want something. Well, you're creating automatic friction when you do that. Now, if instead I had to change my why to a what, and I'd have said, Brian, what caused you to wear that jacket today? That felt differently to you. It took the sting of accusation out of it, and what it did was it would have triggered deep contemplation on your side. That's what the word what does. And the real intention behind it is to create thought versus actually get an answer. Because if I say, Brian, what made you wear that jacket today? You're like, wow, interesting, okay. And you'd have gone through the list. You'd have gone into deep thinking, as Danny Kahneman would say. Now, if you're an analyst, you're going to answer that question for me in 72 hours. You're going to give me a thoughtful answer because you want to think things through. But if I'm negotiating with an analyst and I'm looking for information now, instead I might pick the label and I'd say, Brian, seems like you got a reason for wearing that jacket today. And you're going to start laying it out right then and there. It's not going to cause the deep thinking that the what question would have caused, which is fatiguing. It's going to increase a high likelihood that you're going to comfortably start laying out your reasoning to me, particularly with an analytical type who love to think things through before they answer. And so to get them to answer early on, they got to feel like it was their choice. And if I say, seems like you got a reason for wearing that jacket, since there's such a choice there as to whether or not you answer, the chances of me getting a really good answer out of you in the moment is very high. And that's what a label does. It increases the likelihood of information. You don't feel cornered by it, so it actually increases our rapport. You actually kind of like me saying, seems like you got a reason for wearing that jacket, because you do, and you'd love to share it if you didn't think you were going to be criticized.
Are there particular times when it's appropriate to use labeling, or it seems, as you were talking, I was thinking that if you were at a standstill, that might be an appropriate time to use a label. It seems like there's something standing in the way, or it seems like there's something blocking us from moving forward or from making progress. But maybe that's not the only time that it's used. Are there other times, or is that even accurate?
No, that's very accurate. And what we found is on the Black Swan team, and we all use these skills all the time on colleagues, family, friends, everybody, because we're always seeking collaboration. And on the team, when you start to raise your skill level pretty high, you may label almost all the time.
Okay.
Because you can adjust it and you can adapt it into the moment. And it requires you to pay attention to get a good label. And you really like putting those points up on the board. So many of the other skills we use in point of fact as supplemental skills when we're trying to make a dynamic change in the moment. I might be trying to get you to see things differently, which may cause me to choose a how or a what question. I may need to let you know that there's some behavior that you've engaged in that I'm extremely uncomfortable with. And in order for me to get you to stop it or to get you to stop talking to me entirely, I may use what's called an I message. I got an email the other day, guys pitching me, and I get these pitches on emails all the time. And I'll engage. I can smell from the pitch early on, basically if they're trying to get me to do something for nothing. And so I emailed back and I said, it seems like you got a budget. And there was no response, which means they got no budget. And then he came back with me, if I could just get a few minutes of your time, I could lay this all out for you. My next email was an iMessage. And I said, when you avoid a question I ask you, I get concerned because it's going to keep me from talking to you over the long term. Because if I bring up an issue that I want an answer to, whether it be with a label or question, if you don't respond to it, that's the way you're always going to be. Now, I need to let you know that it's a problem if it continues, and then you're either going to adapt or you're going to stop talking to me and not waste any more time. When I hit this individual with the iMessage, I haven't heard from him since, which confirms my suspicion that their version of win-win was that they win a lot.
And you don't.
And I don't, yeah.
Chris, one thing that surprised me in your book was reading about compromise, that we shouldn't compromise, that we shouldn't split the difference.
Yeah.
Now, you know better than I do that it seems like historically in negotiations, the quickest way to wrap things up is when we've gone back and forth a little bit on price, And then either I or you say, you know what? Why don't we just split the difference and be done with it? What is it that causes us to compromise? And maybe it's just that we want to be done with it. And what can we do to equip ourselves to walk away rather than settling for a bad deal? Because I know you say a bad deal is worse than no deal.
Yeah, exactly. Compromise is guaranteed lose-lose. And one side is going to feel like they've lost a lot more than the other. So what does that do for your long-term relationship? Because the real profitability, collaboration is about long-term profitable relationships. Last century, I'm a last century guy, when we just had newspapers and there were these one-panel cartoons in the newspapers. There was one I remember called The Lockhorns. It was about a husband and a wife. And a husband looks at his wife and says, why don't we compromise? That way we'll both be unhappy. I mean, that's unfortunately the problem with compromise. Both people are left unhappy. Now, it has this, it's proposed in a lot of society as being a good thing to do. You should be willing to compromise. You shouldn't be aggressive. Politicians compromise, which amazes me. Like if compromise was a good thing, then the U.S. Congress would be one efficient organization. And all of your tax dollars would be very well spent, because they fight, and compromise at the last minute. That happens every single time. They declare victory in the moment, they go home, and they go back to fighting again. I mean, that's what compromise really gets us. So it's been sold to us as a good idea. And it has this mystique of that you're willing to work with the other side. But in point of fact, in the application of it, creates lose-lose on a regular basis. And I think people do it because they just haven't been taught a better method. They haven't really been taught how to collaborate. And most really good business people learn the hard way how to collaborate, or what they really learn is quick recognition of someone extremely likely to collaborate, and they just stop dealing with everybody else. I see that very commonly, that experienced business people just sniff out a non-collaborative person or an exploited person, and they just stop talking to them right away. They don't compromise. They just don't deal with people that are trying to get them to compromise.
Your book is it's just chock full of ideas and strategies that we could talk about for hours. And by the way, any one of the strategies and tactics that you write about in your book is worth 100 times, maybe more than the 15 or 20 bucks on Amazon.
Thank you.
I appreciate that you took time just to put the book together, to put your ideas and tools and techniques and strategies on paper. You wrote about something, and this is actually, it's a nice solution, not nice, it's an effective solution, I think, to splitting the difference. And it's something you wrote about, I remember in the book, called the Ackerman method. It blew me away. And one thing I liked about it was, unlike some of the other tactics and strategies that are take a little bit longer to sort of get the hang of and practice and deploy, but the Ackerman method is simple. It's easy to understand. It's easy to apply, and you can use it immediately anytime you're in an economic transaction. What's the origin of the Ackerman method, and if you could tell our listeners and viewers how that works?
Yeah, I got taught the Ackerman method when I was FBI kidnapping negotiator, and we had to get the kidnappers, if we were going to allow the family of the company to pay money, we needed to do two things. We needed to get the money down really low so that it wasn't a profitable operation for the bad guys. And we needed them to let the hostage go, because, you can't sue a kidnapper for not letting the hostage go. And we used to have commanders that would say, when is this going to be over? And our answer would be when the kidnapper feels like he's gotten everything he can. Primary emphasis on the word feel. We're talking about the emotions, the feelings of kidnappers being the key to the hostage's release, which is insanely absurd. So Ackerman was designed to make them feel like they'd gotten everything that they could, with a bargaining system that basically plays out in 3 stages. Every time you make a change, you make a raise, you make an increase in your move, it has to be smaller than the one previously. The bad guys psychologically feel like they're draining you of every last drop. You put a lot of empathy and understanding in between each change in the price, which you're trying to actually settle far sooner than you've gone through the 3 stages. And then finally, when you get to the last stage, you have to at least then have used an odd number, if not having used odd numbers all along. And then you throw in something non-tangible, non-monetary, whatever it may be. In kidnapping negotiations, we just say, look, the hostage's family's got this great stereo. We'll give you the stereo. But you give the impression that they've drained you of every last drop, and they feel like they've gotten everything they could. Therefore, if the financial exchange is made between the family of the company and the hostages, it's a small amount of money, money is really easy to trace. So they didn't get rich off it. It's the same reason a bank teller is given bait money in a bank robbery to save the teller's life and to get the bank robber out of the bank without opening the vault to him, but then leaving a trail that you can follow afterwards so that you can catch the bad guy. So Ackerman is this great methodology if you get into bare-knuckled bargaining with a highly adversarial opponent that you have to deal with, to make them feel like they've gotten everything they can so that they do the deal when you do come to a price and they perform, as opposed to reneging on the agreement or trying to hold you hostage over something else, which they're not going to have the appetite to do because you wore them out so much over the first transaction, they're not eager to repeat it.
That's so powerful and so impressive. And if you didn't get that, by the way, go back and listen to that again, because it's an extremely powerful, again, when you're negotiating anything economic, whether you're buying a car, buying a house, anything like that. If we could just talk about 2 points that you made, and Chris, and these actually came at the tail end. I'll start with the last thing first. So you mentioned throwing in the stereo. So is that literally, well, geez, I mean, you've tapped me out. Let's see what else I have. I mean, I can throw in this stereo. Is that the point of that?
Yeah, and it's about if you've got it.
To make it clear, you have absolutely no money left, but you want to get the deal done, and throw in a pair of sneakers or a stereo or whatever.
Right. Yeah, you got an adversary that has to feel like they got the best deal possible, and the whole structure is designed every step of the way to contribute to that feeling in one way or another. Empathy wears them out because they're adversarial and you're trying to be collaborative. And it becomes more work for them than for you. The decreasing changes makes them feel like they're pushing you to the limit. Then when you want to express it, you're at your last dollar, you're at your last dime, you're at your last penny. But you're still being collaborative because you've been collaborative the whole time. And you figuratively look around like, what else have I got to give you? I mean, like, I love my stereo. I love my shoes. Whatever it is, can I give you something else? But I'm out of cash. I really am. And you're going to feel like that because it's been such a struggle for you to be competitive while I'm trying to be collaborative. I'm not inflaming the situation at all, but I'm really subtly wearing you down so that when we get to the end, you need the last little bit to feel like you got everything you could to make you happy. And that's when I start offering something non-monetary in nature because I ran out of money.
That's great and extremely effective. Say more about the odd dollar amount. So I know we see things in the store that are $1.99 or a course that's $97. It's not $100. How does that enter into negotiation? And tell us more about the psychology behind it.
Yeah, odd numbers just feel firmer. They feel like they're starting to. And simultaneously, even numbers that end with zero, they seem like offers, tentative, movable, changeable offers. And people react that way. Human beings react that way. Every human being on the planet, whether it's a kidnapper in Colombia or whether it's a business person in Boston, the odd numbers seem to carry some extra weight. One of my favorite examples of the Ackerman method, one of my students at Georgetown was in his apartment complex, wanted to raise his rent. And he thought, he was a very playful guy, and he wanted to try the process, and he was willing to pay the extra rent, but he wanted to try the Ackerman method with this guy. And he went through a couple of rounds of bargaining, and the first number he laid out was so low that the landlord just laughed at him and said, I'd be losing money if I gave that to you. And he kind of laughed back too at the same time. He stayed playful the whole time. When they finally got to the last number he threw out, he said, here, give me a piece of paper and a pencil. Now, he'd already calculated to the last odd dollar. I think it was like $1,921 a month, something like that he was going to pay because he put it in the Ackerman system and he came up with the numbers in advance. So he asked the guy for a piece of paper and a pencil, and in front of him, he just wrote a bunch of numbers. I don't know. He might have wrote his birth date. He might have wrote his shoe size. He might have wrote down how much he weighed, and then he wrote down the number that he already had, and he circled it and he handed it back to the guy. And the guy looked at him and says, "Wow, you must be an accountant." Which he wasn't, and he wasn't going to give that up. And he said, "Well, yeah, I am." And the landlord said, "We got a deal." And he ended up actually paying less per month than what his existing lease agreement was.
Well, it makes it seem more calculated, doesn't it? Like you've really taken time to figure out exactly what it is that you can either afford or pay. And if it's an odd amount, it gives it more credibility, I would think.
It does. That's exactly what happens. Don't know why it does. I just know it works.
Yeah, that's great. Chris, your company is called the Black Swan Group, which is based on the Black Swan theory. What is the Black Swan theory, and what makes that such a fitting name for your company?
Well, the little things that make all the difference in the world, the subtle little tiny shifts, the 2-millimeter shifts. In 2007, Nassim Nicholas Taleb wrote this great book called The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable. And that was just when I was getting out of the FBI, and I loved the book. I loved Taleb's writing. I've got several of his books. He's an interesting thinker and insightful. And I thought that was a great metaphor for both what the skills do, because they're very imperceivable, yet they make all the difference in the world. Like me knowing the difference between why, what, to it seems. That's invisible. You have no idea of the different choices that I'm making to impact you differently emotionally, and then how it's creating a response inside you. You don't feel cornered by it. Also, the Black Swan, I'm looking for pieces of information that'll improve the deal for both of us. So I'm looking for the tiny little things that will help us both make a better deal and want to move together forward at length for years, because the deals are always better than you imagined them. So the Black Swan was a great metaphor for the company, the Black Swan Group, and it's worked for us very well since.
How can people learn more about you? I know, we've talked about your book, Never Split the Difference. You mentioned your master class. How can our listeners and viewers learn more about you and about negotiation?
The website is blackswanltd.com, BlackSwanLTD.com. As soon as you go there, you're going to get the opportunity, first of all, to subscribe to our newsletter, which is complimentary, actionable, and concise. It comes out on Tuesday mornings. It's a usable, easily to digest article on practical advice for negotiation, plus any announcements about training or new products will come through that newsletter. You'll get it Tuesday morning wherever you are in the world. Now, the website also has a lot of free stuff on it, ways to get started with us. You take the book and you add in the newsletter, and you'll start to get better at negotiations right away. And you'll be ready for some of our more advanced training when you're really ready to take some big leaps forward. So wherever you are, we'll meet you, whatever skill level you are. You only got to be ambitious and coachable.
I really appreciate all that, Chris, and we'll include all of those resources in the show notes. Just one other comment on the book. I really love how you're quick to give credit to other authors and books that have helped you along the way and can help us all to become better negotiators. So when you pick up the book, Never Split the Difference, and go through it, you're going to learn lots of tools, techniques, and strategies. But you also have the advantage of a master negotiator, Chris Voss, and I'm guessing, Chris, you've read dozens, if not hundreds, of books on negotiation, and you've mentioned a few that have made the difference in your life. And so what we have is a little list of the best, most powerful negotiation books. So I highly recommend that.
Thank you.
This has been terrific. Thanks again for joining us on the show, Chris.
It's been a pleasure, Brian. Thank you very much.
And to our listeners and viewers, thanks again for tuning into Life Excellence. Please support the show by subscribing, sharing it with others, posting about today's show with Chris Voss on social media, and leaving a rating and review. You can also learn more about me at brianbartes.com. Until next time, dream big dreams and make each day your masterpiece.